In the dusty desert town of Dustwood, where tumbleweeds rolled across dirt roads and everyone knew each other's secrets, lived a girl named Lydia Harlow. Tall for her age and painfully shy, Lydia was what the locals called odd stock. Her family ran the only taxidermy and relic shop in the region, a dim, cluttered store full of eerie specimens and strange artifacts from the old frontier days. While her father lovingly restored ancient cowboy boots and bird mounts, Lydia spent her days dodging sideways glances and whispers from the townspeople. At school, she was teased relentlessly. Her uneven haircut, hand-me-down clothes, and bookish nature made her the perfect target. Cactus Girl, the boys sneered, referencing both her prickly demeanor and the desert scent that clung to her from her family's dusty shop. Girls called her the Crypt Keeper's Kid, laughing as she walked by with a stack of fantasy novels clutched to her chest. It didn't help that Lydia was accident-prone. Tripping over her own shoes in gym class became routine, and every stumble was met with cruel applause. But no one was crueler than Mason Griggs. Mason was everything Lydia wasn't: confident, athletic, and from a family that practically ran Dustwood. His father was the mayor, and his mother chaired every town council and festival committee. With piercing blue eyes and a smirk that could charm teachers into giving him a pass, Mason reigned over school with ease. His favorite pastime? Turning Lydia into a laughingstock. If she spilled her lunch, Mason narrated it like a sports event. If she answered a question in class, he'd quip, "The relic speaks," drawing snickers from classmates. To survive, Lydia found refuge in books. She became a regular at the town's forgotten library, an old mining office turned reading space, where she would read about heroines who fought dragons and outwitted tyrants. There, in those dusty pages, she built dreams of escape. She imagined herself rising above Dustwood, leaving behind the sneers and whispers, becoming someone people looked up to, not down upon. Her parents, kind but worn from years of town disdain, encouraged her gently. One day, her father said, "These people will choke on their own judgment. You just keep climbing, baby." And so she did. Despite her pain, Lydia focused fiercely on her academics. She aced every test, volunteered at the town museum, and eventually applied to out-of-state universities. The day her acceptance letter to Norcrest University arrived, Lydia stood on the ridge overlooking Dustwood and whispered to the wind, "One day, they'll remember my name." Then she packed her bags and never looked back. College was a rebirth. In the big city, no one cared about taxidermy or tripping in gym class. Lydia traded her desert clothes for sleek jeans and blazers. She got braces, then got them removed. She wore her curls proud, learned to speak with clarity, and walked with a stride that dared anyone to underestimate her. She studied public policy and strategic leadership, her mind sharp with ambition and her heart burning with purpose. Over the next decade, Lydia rose fast in the corporate world. She went from an overlooked analyst to a department head known for efficiency, empathy, and razor-sharp decisions. By the age of 36, she was offered a director position at an energy consultancy firm in Ridgeway, a prestigious firm with roots all across the state. Her first day on the job felt surreal. She wore a crisp, olive green suit and stepped into the marble-floored lobby with pride. But nothing could have prepared her for what came next. As she was led into the executive boardroom to meet her new team, Lydia's breath caught in her throat. Sitting across the table, flipping through a project dossier, was Mason Griggs. Older now, with flecks of silver in his hair and the same smug smile etched onto his face. Her past had just walked into her present. For a second, she felt like the insecure teenager again. Her knees wobbled, her palms sweated. That old voice in her head returned, whispering, "Don't trip. Don't speak. Don't give them a reason to laugh." But Lydia was not the same girl anymore. She nodded politely, pretending not to recognize him. Mason didn't seem to notice her shock, or her identity. To him, she was just another polished professional in a suit. But to Lydia, this was the moment she had imagined for years. The bullied girl was now the boss. And the boy who humiliated her? He would report to her. As the team settled in, Lydia cleared her throat and introduced herself. Her voice, calm and measured, echoed through the room. She outlined the firm's upcoming project goals and her leadership vision with crisp precision. When the meeting ended, There was a beat of silence, and then applause. Genuine, respectful, admiring applause. Mason didn't say a word. But his expression had changed. There was a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Lydia walked out of the room with her head held high. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she had truly arrived. Lydia adjusted quickly to her new role at Northmore Energy Solutions. The team was competent, the office modern and efficient, and the workload challenging in all the right ways. But the shadow that loomed over her first week wasn't a looming deadline or unfamiliar protocol, it was Mason Griggs. He hadn't recognized her yet. Or maybe he had, and was pretending not to. Either way, Lydia kept her distance, preferring to watch and gather information. Mason was assigned to her core project team. She could have requested a transfer, offloaded him to another department under a different director. But she didn't. There was something quietly satisfying in having him seated at the far end of the long table during daily strategy meetings, scribbling notes and nodding at her directives. Lydia had waited her whole life to reclaim power. Now, she held it in subtle glances and sign-off sheets. She observed Mason with a curious mix of resentment and confusion. He was punctual, courteous, and rarely spoke out of turn. He offered well-thought ideas, supported struggling teammates, and handled complex tasks with grace. It was infuriating. Where was the arrogant loudmouth from high school who used to trip her in the cafeteria? The smug teen who'd pantomimed fake swoons when she gave a science presentation? Lydia had expected a man-child who would crack under pressure. Instead, she found someone competent. But she wasn't ready to forgive, not yet. One afternoon, she decided to test him. "Griggs," she said sharply during a team meeting, "I want you to handle the risk analysis for the Ventura Bay proposal. Full breakdown, economic, environmental, political. Due Monday." Mason blinked. The task was enormous. 4 days wasn't nearly enough. Still, he nodded. "Understood. No team assistance," Lydia added, watching his reaction. Again, Mason didn't flinch. "I'll make it happen." And he did. By Monday morning, a meticulously organized binder landed on Lydia's desk, complete with annotated charts and risk projections. It was excellent. Annoyingly so. Lydia frowned at the pages, unsure whether to be impressed or unsettled. He hadn't so much as asked a follow-up question. That week, she assigned him 2 more high-pressure deliverables, both under tight timelines. He completed them without complaint, staying late into the evening and often being the last to leave. There was no swagger, no ego, just quiet diligence. Even stranger, Mason had a reputation around the office as a bit of a do-gooder. He coordinated supply drives, volunteered at shelters, and had apparently set up an internship program for underprivileged students. His name was on the building's community board more than the CEO's. It made no sense. One day, as Lydia grabbed coffee in the break room, she overheard 2 junior staffers chatting. "Did you hear Mason paid for those interns' laptops out of his own pocket? Seriously? That guy's like a real-life Ted Lasso or something." Lydia sipped her coffee and turned toward the window, her mind racing. Something didn't add up. People didn't just change like that. Did they? She needed answers. So, she set a trap. A casual lunch, under the guise of leadership feedback. "Mason," she said one Thursday morning, "I've been meaning to catch up with you. Want to grab lunch?" "My treat." Mason looked surprised but nodded. "Sure, Director Harlow." They met at a bistro 2 blocks from the office, outdoor seating, neutral ground. Lydia wore her favorite forest green blouse and silver hoop earrings, power and grace, carefully calculated. As they ordered, she watched him closely. Still no sign of recognition in his eyes. Either he really didn't remember her, or he was a world-class actor. They made small talk for a while, about the firm, the recent contract win, the surprisingly spicy hummus on the appetizer plate. Then Mason leaned back in his chair and gave a quiet, ironic chuckle. "Funny how life works," he said, staring at his water glass. "I used to think I'd be running a tech startup by now, or maybe in politics. Never thought I'd end up working under someone who, well, let's just say I have a lot to learn from." Lydia's heart skipped. "Why's that?" she asked, tone carefully neutral. Mason sighed. I had some growing up to do. Still do, probably. Back in school, I was not the best version of myself. You don't say, Lydia muttered, a little sharper than intended. Mason looked up, startled. I don't expect you to believe me, he said, his voice quieter now. But I've worked hard to change. My daughter, Ava, she's been my North Star. She's got spina bifida. Born with it. Doctors said she'd never walk without assistance. She's 6 now, and she's already hiking small trails with crutches. Lydia stared at him, thrown. She's tough, Mason continued. Tougher than I ever was. Watching her fight through every obstacle. It changed me. Made me realize how much of a coward I used to be. He met Lydia's eyes, his expression vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. I used to bully people who were different. I made it a game. I don't know why. Insecurity, maybe. Immaturity. But I regret it every day. And I work, every day, to be the kind of person she can be proud of. A long silence stretched between them. Lydia didn't speak. She couldn't. A war was waging inside her, the fire of old humiliation clashing with the softening ember of empathy. She thought of the bruised girl she used to be, sitting alone in the library while Mason laughed with his friends outside. And then she thought of this man across from her, who now carried a different weight on his shoulders, the weight of being a father, a provider, and a man trying to outrun his past. When the check came, Mason reached for it. Lydia stopped him. My treat, she said, her voice low. He smiled gently. Thanks, Director. She nodded and stood. Just Lydia. As they walked back to the office, she noticed something she hadn't before, how he held the door open for the receptionist, how he greeted the janitor by name. Maybe people did change. Maybe. But Lydia wasn't ready to make peace just yet. Not until she knew for sure. The days that followed the lunch lingered in Lydia's thoughts like the fading echo of an unresolved chord. She found herself replaying Mason's words again and again. The image of him holding his coffee, speaking softly about his daughter's fight and his own regrets, didn't match the version seared into her high school memories. And yet, there it was, contradicting everything she had believed for years. Still, Lydia couldn't shake her suspicion. People didn't change that much, did they? She began to dig, quietly, of course. She requested a confidential review of Mason's employment history. His file showed a steady career climb, glowing performance reviews, no signs of the entitled behavior she remembered. She even called in a favor from a friend in HR to check disciplinary records, nothing. No complaints, no HR flags. He was, by all official accounts, a model employee. But Lydia didn't want the file version of Mason Griggs. She wanted the truth, the person behind the polite smiles and community work. So, she watched. She noticed small things. How he offered his umbrella to a new intern during a sudden downpour. How he stayed behind after meetings to help clear the whiteboard or adjust the conference room setup. How he always asked, "Need a hand?" Even when he clearly had somewhere to be. It gnawed at her. Was it all just a performance? Or had time, hardship, and fatherhood really changed him? Then came the turning point. The firm launched a high-profile outreach initiative, an environmental impact partnership with local schools. Lydia was placed at the helm, and Mason, surprise, volunteered to co-lead one of the subcommittees. She almost reassigned him, but something inside her hesitated. I want to see what he does with this, she told herself. The kickoff meeting was packed with logistics. Mason took notes, asked questions, and proposed an idea that impressed even the skeptical finance department, a mentorship program pairing energy consultants with high school seniors interested in environmental science. Lydia watched his presentation, arms crossed, waiting for him to falter. But he didn't. He was focused, articulate, and passionate. And when the meeting ended, he stayed behind to clean up leftover catering while chatting with one of the interns about college prep. Later that evening, she received an email from one of the firm's partners. Subject: Outstanding team member. Lydia. Just wanted to let you know, Mason's proposal on mentorship was a hit with the Ridgeway High Board. They're calling it one of the most innovative outreach strategies they've seen from a corporate sponsor. Great pick for the team. Richard. Lydia stared at the screen. Her instincts told her to be pleased, but her heart felt unsettled. She closed her laptop and leaned back, watching the city skyline blink to life beyond the tall windows of her office. Somewhere below, car horns blared and street lights flickered like stars. Her thoughts drifted to Dustwood. To a dusty library. To a teenage girl who once prayed for the day her tormentor would have to answer to her. And now, that day had come. Only, it didn't feel like a victory. Later that week, she received an unexpected visitor. "Got a minute?" Mason asked from her office door. Lydia looked up. "Sure." He stepped in, holding a manila folder. "Final proposal draft for the mentorship track." "Thanks," she replied coolly. He hovered, then sat across from her without invitation. "Can I ask you something personal?" Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Depends." Mason looked genuinely nervous. "Have we met before?" "Like, before this job?" Lydia's heartbeat skipped. She kept her face composed. "Why do you ask?" He laughed softly, rubbing the back of his neck. "I've had this strange feeling since the first week. Like I know you. But I can't place it." She tilted her head. "Do you remember a girl from Dustwood? Lydia Harlow?" There it was. The flicker of memory. His face froze. "Oh, God," he muttered, the color draining from his cheeks. "You." Lydia nodded. "Now you remember." Mason's hands dropped into his lap. His voice was barely audible. "Lydia. Damn. I didn't recognize you. I mean, you've changed. Completely." "And you haven't," she said coldly. "Not in my memory." Silence fell. Mason stood, then sat again, clearly battling with himself. "I was awful to you. Back then. I know I was. I've thought about it more than you can imagine." "Why?" Lydia asked, her voice firm. "Why me?" He looked pained. "Because you were different. And I was weak. I picked on people who wouldn't fight back. It made me feel powerful. Important. Like I had control. But it wasn't real. And now?" She pressed. "Now I'm trying to fix what I broke," he said. "In myself, and maybe in the world around me. I know I can't erase the past. But I can stop being that person." Lydia leaned back, arms folded, studying him. It would have been easy to lash out. To remind him of every humiliation. Every cruel nickname. Every day she walked home in tears while he laughed with his friends. But she saw something else now. The same guilt she once carried, the resentment, the longing for a chance to rewrite history, was mirrored in his eyes. Only his regret had arrived long before this reunion. And he had acted on it, quietly, consistently, without expecting recognition or forgiveness. "I wanted to crush you," she said, finally. "When I saw you that first day. I wanted you to feel small like I did." Mason looked away, ashamed. "But now," Lydia sighed. "I don't think that's who I am anymore." She stood and walked to the window. "You've changed, Mason. Maybe not all the way. Maybe not perfectly. But enough. I see it." He rose, too, uncertain. "I'm not asking you to forget what I did," he said. "I just want to keep proving I'm not that person anymore." Lydia nodded slowly. "Then do it. Not for me. For you. For your daughter." They stood there, the silence heavier than any argument. Then Mason said, "Thank you. For not firing me on the spot." Lydia managed a small smile. "Tempting. But I'm more strategic than that." He laughed, genuinely, nervously, gratefully. As he turned to leave, she called after him. "Mason." He paused. "I'm not your enemy. But I'm also not your past." He nodded once, and walked out. "And Lydia?" She stayed there by the window, watching the sky fade from gold to deep blue. Something in her had shifted. Maybe this wasn't about revenge. Maybe it never had been. Weeks passed, and the tension that once silently danced between Lydia and Mason dissolved into something more neutral, more human. In the months since their confrontation, something unexpected began to bloom between them, not friendship, not yet, but a cautious mutual respect. Lydia remained firm in her leadership. She didn't go easy on Mason or let their shared history influence her decisions. But she also no longer assigned him difficult tasks to make him squirm. She watched him, how he treated interns like equals, how he stayed behind to help sort supplies after team events, how he answered emails from the mentorship program long after hours. She didn't need to test him anymore. He was proving himself all on his own. But there was still a piece of her that hadn't fully let go. That piece whispered at night, asking if she was being naive. Could people like Mason really change? The answer, as it turned out, came not from Mason himself, but from someone else entirely. It was a chilly Friday afternoon when Lydia was leaving the office, bundled in a wool coat, her breath puffing visibly in the air. As she stepped toward the parking garage, she heard a small voice from behind. "Are you Miss Harlow?" She turned. A little girl stood there, no older than 7, with a bright pink parka, a pair of rainbow-striped crutches under her arms, and a curious, fearless gleam in her eyes. Behind her was Mason, half jogging to catch up. "Ava," he said breathlessly, "you were supposed to wait by the car." Ava grinned. "You were talking to boring people, Dad. I wanted to meet the lady from the posters." "The posters?" Lydia asked, amused. Mason blushed. "Our community outreach board. You're on some of the project posters." Ava looked up at her. "You're the boss." "I am," Lydia replied, kneeling to meet her eye level. "And you must be Ava." Ava beamed. "Dad says you're the smartest person in the whole building." Lydia raised an eyebrow at Mason, who rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. "He's also said you used to be mean to people," Ava added matter-of-factly. "Ava." Mason groaned. Lydia burst out laughing, the sound bubbling out of her like fresh spring water. "Well, I appreciate the honesty." Ava leaned closer, lowering her voice. "He's nicer now. I taught him." Lydia's heart softened in an instant. "She really did," Mason said, stepping beside them. "Everything changed after she was born." They stood there in the cold for a moment, just the three of them, surrounded by the fading hum of the city. "She wants to be a scientist," Mason said quietly. "Keeps asking me if she can come to the office someday and do energy stuff." "I'd like that," Lydia replied. "We'll make space for her on the whiteboard." Ava's eyes lit up. "Promise?" "Promise." From that moment, Lydia's perspective shifted again. Seeing Ava, bright, brave, and full of life, helped her see the man beside her in a different light. Mason wasn't just a former bully trying to make amends. He was a father trying to be someone his daughter could look up to. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, strategy sessions, and community events. Lydia found herself working alongside Mason more than she anticipated. Surprisingly, they made a good team. His charm and people skills complemented her meticulous planning. Their rhythm was natural, unforced. During one late-night work session preparing for a major investor pitch, they found themselves sitting across from each other with takeout containers, files scattered between them. "This feels weird," Mason said suddenly. Lydia looked up. "The paperwork?" "No, this. Us. Getting along." She smirked. "You're still not forgiven." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking for it. But I'm glad you gave me a chance." She paused, setting down her pen. "You know, when I was a kid, I used to imagine getting back at you. I'd picture standing in front of a crowd, reading out every awful thing you did to me while you squirmed in front of them." Mason looked down, nodding. "But now?" she continued. "That moment came, and I didn't want it anymore. Because I realized something, I don't need to hurt you to heal myself. I just needed to see you weren't that boy anymore." He was silent for a moment, then looked at her. "You were always better than me," he said. Lydia snorted. "I was always trying to survive you." "I know," Mason whispered. "And I'll carry that forever. But I want you to know. Ava knows the kind of kid I used to be." I told her. "I don't want to hide it from her. I want her to understand that people can change. That they should." That struck a chord deep within Lydia, an honesty few people dared to share, especially with their children. The investor pitch the next day was a smashing success. As the team celebrated with a modest rooftop toast under the city lights, Lydia stood off to the side, watching Mason laughing with colleagues. For the first time, she didn't feel the past clawing at her heels. She felt free. She approached him, holding out a glass of sparkling cider. "To your daughter," she said. He raised his glass. To the boss who terrifies me more than any boardroom. She rolled her eyes. Flattery won't save you when budget reports are due. They laughed, genuinely. Something had shifted again, and this time it was mutual. The bridge between them was no longer built of regret and revenge. It was made of something stronger, understanding. That weekend, Lydia volunteered at the company's community workshop. Ava was there, showing younger kids how to build mini wind turbines out of old plastic bottles. Lydia knelt beside her, watching the girl's eyes sparkle with purpose. "She's going to change the world," Lydia said quietly. Mason, standing behind her, nodded. "She already has." And in that moment, Lydia realized something profound. Forgiveness wasn't about letting someone off the hook. It was about setting herself free, from the pain, from the past, from the anger that had fueled her for so long. It didn't mean forgetting. It meant choosing peace over poison. And she had finally done it. Months had passed since that cold afternoon when Lydia met Ava in the parking lot. The seasons shifted, and so had Lydia's world. The steel walls she had built around her heart, walls forged in high school pain and reinforced by years of ambition, had begun to crumble. Not into ruins, but into something more purposeful. A foundation for something new. The mentorship program took off in ways no one expected. Schools across the county began requesting partnerships. Students flooded in, eager to learn not just about energy sustainability, but leadership, innovation, and resilience. Lydia was often asked to speak at these events, and each time she did, she'd glance toward the back where Mason usually stood, hands in his pockets, quietly observing. He never tried to take credit. Never pushed for recognition. He was simply there, steady, supportive, changed. Their relationship had settled into a rhythm of gentle respect. Lydia no longer flinched when she heard his voice, and Mason no longer walked with the weight of guilt in every step near her. It was as if they had agreed, wordlessly, to put the past down and walk forward, side by side, though not necessarily together. But sometimes, in quieter moments, Lydia wondered, was it enough to forgive, or did she owe herself the right to be fully seen? Not just as his boss or a successful woman, but as the girl he once broke, now whole again? The answer came on the day of the firm's annual celebration of impact, an evening event held in a grand hall, meant to honor those who had made meaningful contributions that year. Lydia, as director, was one of the hosts. She arrived early, her dress a deep sapphire that shimmered like the night sky. Her team had insisted she take the spotlight that evening, and for once, she didn't argue. She had worked hard, earned the praise. Why not let herself accept it? As the event progressed, guests mingled beneath golden lights and soft jazz. Lydia stood at the podium, delivering her closing speech. "Impact," she said, her voice steady, "is not always loud. It's not always in headlines or high-level reports. Sometimes, the deepest impact is felt in the quietest transformations, in the people who change not because they are forced to, but because they choose to become better." She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd, landing, briefly, on Mason. "In our work, we deal with energy," she continued. "But it's not just solar panels or wind farms. It's the energy we give each other. Through mentorship, kindness, accountability, and belief. That energy is renewable too, if we let it be." Applause followed. Warm, heartfelt. As the night wound down, Lydia stood at the edge of the ballroom, sipping champagne. The room buzzed behind her, but her thoughts were still. "You meant every word of that," Mason said beside her, surprising her. She turned. "I did. You could have made it about numbers or success metrics, but you didn't." "I've had enough of numbers," she replied. "I'm more interested in stories now." They stood in silence a moment, watching the city lights flicker through the tall windows. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what you said to me that night. About not needing revenge to heal." She glanced at him. "It stuck with me," Mason continued. "And it's made me think more about what I want Ava to learn from me. Not just that people can change, but that it's possible to forgive." "She'll learn that from you, Mason," Lydia said softly. "Not from words. From how you live." "I hope so." He turned to face her. "And from how the people I've hurt treat me when I show up differently. You've been more gracious than I deserved." Lydia looked at him carefully. "I'm not sure forgiveness is about what someone deserves," she said. "It's about what the other person is ready to give." She hesitated, then reached into her small evening bag and pulled out a folded paper, a photograph. It was old, slightly faded. A snapshot from Dustwood High School. In it, a girl stood holding a science fair ribbon, her eyes wide with uncertainty, shoulders hunched, braces glinting under fluorescent lights. "That was me," she said, handing it to him. Mason studied it, emotion creeping into his face. "I remember that day," he whispered. "I think I said something cruel about your project. You said I must have stitched it together in my dad's basement with a bunch of dead frogs." He winced. "God." She took the photo back and slipped it into her bag. "That girl?" Lydia said. "She wanted revenge. But the woman I am now wants peace. And tonight, I think I finally have it." Mason smiled sadly. "Thank you. Truly." A gentle warmth settled between them. There was no need for more words. The following week, Lydia hosted a mentoring session at Ridgeway High. She watched as Ava rolled into the room on her colorful crutches, beaming as she greeted other kids. Mason sat at the back, as always, letting his daughter take the spotlight. Later, as Lydia spoke to the students, she noticed Ava raising her hand. "What's the most important thing you've learned as a leader?" she asked boldly. Lydia paused, then smiled. "That real leadership isn't about power," she said. "It's about responsibility. It's about lifting people up, even the ones who once tried to keep you down." Ava nodded, as if she already understood. That evening, alone in her apartment, Lydia lit a candle and placed the photograph of her younger self beside it. Not as a symbol of pain, but as a tribute to her journey. She had come full circle, not by burying her past, but by facing it, transforming it, and letting it guide her without controlling her. She had found her place, not in Dustwood, not in revenge fantasies, but in her own skin, her own voice. In forgiveness. In strength. And that, she realized, was her true victory.